In the year 1396, St. Paul's Cathedral in London gleamed with hundreds of candles dancing against the Gothic stained glass, while the organ resonated through the imposing arches announcing a royal procession advancing down the central aisle. But this was no ordinary ceremony. It was the wedding of a 6-year-old child. Isabel of France, Europe's youngest princess, walked toward the altar where Richard II, King of England, awaited her. A man of 29 years. Dressed in golden silks that dragged across the stone floor, the little girl could barely support the weight of her tiny crown. Within minutes, she would be declared Queen of England, sealing a political alliance that would change the destiny of 2 nations. To understand Isabel's tragic fate, we must return to the 14th century in France when the kingdom lived under the shadow of royal madness. Isabel was born on the 9th day of November in the year 1389 at the Louvre Palace, daughter of Charles VI of France and Isabe of Bavaria. She was the 4th daughter of the royal couple, a princess born in dark times that would mark her entire existence. Her father, Charles VI, was known as Charles the Mad due to episodes of insanity that had afflicted him since the age of 24. During his crisis, the king did not recognize his wife or children, believed he was made of glass and would shatter if anyone touched him, or fled through palace corridors, screaming that invisible enemies pursued him. France plunged into chaos, governed by regents who fought for power, while the true king remained prisoner of his own mind. Isabel's mother, Isabel of Bavaria, was an equally controversial figure. Isabel of Bavaria was ambitious and ruthless, exploiting her husband's illness to seize influence and wealth. Chroniclers portrayed her as immoral and manipulative, viewing her daughters as pawns in political alliances. In this toxic atmosphere, young Isabel grew up amid court intrigues and national chaos. France was ravaged by the 100 Years' War, torn between the Armagnacs and Burgundians, and shaken by a mad king. Watching her father's breakdown and her mother's cold ambition scarred her deeply. In the year 1396, at just 6 years old, Isabel's fate was sealed. King Richard II of England, seeking peace and stability after years of war and the death of his wife and of Bohemia, looked to France for a new alliance. Led by the Duke of Berry, the French council proposed Isabel's marriage to Richard in exchange for £800,000 and a 28-year truce. To France, bankrupt and desperate, the deal seemed worth the sacrifice of a child. Negotiations treated Isabel as property, her youth a mere inconvenience. Though some advised waiting until she was older, Richard's political desperation prevailed. In October 1396, the marriage was finalized. Isabel was delivered to England as a diplomatic gift, a child queen exchanged for peace. Her farewell at the Louvre was ceremonial and cold. Her father wept briefly, while her mother regarded the parting as a business victory. Isabel, unaware of her fate, carried only her dolls and pet dog, thinking the journey temporary. The grand procession from Calais to London lasted weeks, celebrated in every town. Exhausted by the spectacle, the child wept and longed for home. Richard II, at 29, held a magnificent wedding at St. Paul's Cathedral. Draped in English and French silks, the ceremony symbolized peace between nations. Richard, a cultured and grieving man, treated Isabel with kindness, as a daughter rather than a wife. She was given private chambers, French tutors, and a life of comfort within Westminster Palace. But her fragile happiness ended in 1399. Richard was overthrown and murdered by Henry Bolingbroke, who became Henry IV. Isabel, barely 10, was left a child widow, her marriage unconsummated and her dowry spent. The new king kept her captive at Havering Castle, hoping to use her for future diplomacy. There, she endured 3 years of isolation, writing letters to France pleading for rescue. "I write to you in tears," she confessed, "for I am kept here as a prisoner, far from everything I love." Charles VI, in one of his rare moments of clarity, finally demanded the return of his daughter. After years of negotiation, Isabel came back to France in the year 1401. The girl who had left Paris at 6 returned as a solemn young woman of 12, marked by years of isolation and loss. Her homecoming brought no joy. France was still torn by war, and her family viewed her more as a burden than a child. In the year 1405, at 16, Isabel was again used as a political tool when her mother arranged her marriage to Charles of Orleans, a poet and nobleman. Yet this union offered her brief happiness. Charles was gentle and devoted, and for the first time, Isabel experienced affection free of politics. They shared a love for poetry and art, finding solace in each other amid the turmoil of the French court. That peace was short-lived. In 1407, Charles was captured by the English at the Battle of Agincourt and imprisoned for 25 years. Once again, Isabel was left alone, a widow in everything but name. Her life, twice stripped of love, sank into quiet resignation. She remained at court, devoting herself to charity and using her experience to guide royal relatives in matters of diplomacy. In 1409, she gave birth to her only daughter, Joanna of Orleans. Motherhood softened her grief but also reminded her of her own lost childhood. She feared her daughter would face the same fate, used to seal alliances and repay debts. That same year, Isabel died at just 20, from complications of childbirth. Chroniclers barely noted her passing, a tragic contrast to the splendor that had once surrounded her marriage to Richard II. Her brief, sorrowful life exposed the cruelty of royal politics. From the age of 6, Isabel had carried the burdens of kingdoms. Her story reveals how medieval princesses were treated as property, traded between rulers to maintain fragile peace. She was sacrificed twice, first as a child bride, then as a young widow. More than 6 centuries later, her story remains a haunting symbol of innocence exploited by power. Behind the grand treaties and royal weddings of history were children like Isabel, whose lives were crushed beneath the ambitions of kings. The little queen who had once been paraded as a gift of peace became a silent testament to the cost of power, a reminder that every alliance built on sacrifice leaves behind a victim unseen. Even incest, the most taboo of taboos, found loopholes in the nobility. Marriages between cousins were common to preserve lineages, but closer relations occurred in secret. In the year 1320, Queen Isabella of England, known as the She-Wolf of France, maintained an affair with Roger Mortimer that shocked the court, but was tolerated by Edward II, whose own relationship with Piers Gaveston raised suspicions of homosexuality. Bestiality, punished with hanging for both man and animal, was whispered in rural villages where isolated shepherds sought company in flocks. Ecclesiastical tribunals in the 14th century recorded cases where confessors absolved sinners in exchange for silence, preferring discretion to public exposure, and pagan orgies survived disguised as folk festivals in Bavarian forests in the 15th century. Peasants celebrated Walpurgis Night with rituals that included group sex, tolerated by feudal lords who participated anonymously. Hypocrisy reached its peak in Inquisition tribunals where inquisitors like Bernard Gouet in the year 1323 interrogated heretics about sexual sins while maintaining concubines in secret residences. These tolerated secrets reveal the Middle Ages not as an era of purity but of human contradictions. The Church condemned what it could not extinguish, and society turned a blind eye to preserve order. Forbidden practices flourished because the flesh was weak and power always accommodating. These hidden truths remind us that behind the facade of crusades and cathedrals pulsed a humanity as complex and flawed as our own. The Middle Ages was not a monster, but a distorted mirror of repressed desires, where the forbidden was practiced in secret, so the world could continue turning. And so while kings fell and child queens suffered, the secrets of the flesh remained buried, waiting for brave historians to bring them to light.